Is everybody appropriately caffeinated for this talk? All right, so first of all, I have nothing to declare, except maybe I'm a huge nerd, a huge geek to even have this topic to begin with, right? So, yeah, no declaration. We're going to start really, really basic, super basic, like extremely basic. What is eating? That's how basic we're going to start. Well, plants are autotrophs, and they create their own food. Animals are heterotrophs, which means they're only alive because they constantly eat other living organisms. That's right. Humans are animals, and we only live by eating other living things nonstop, which kind of blows the whole vegan ethics thing out of the water, right off the bat. But that's how it works. I didn't design the system. So you've got herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, but no matter what kind of vor you are, plants are at the base of all animal nutrition. Now, they don't want to be at the base of all animal nutrition. The herbivores are predators to the plants, right? They don't like that, but that's where they are. Plants make all nutrition for all animals, and that's, again, how the system works. What plants do is they take the three big elements of life, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and using energy from the sun, they make all their own food and build all their own tissues. Now, in addition to carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, you've got about 25 other elements that are absolutely essential for plant and animal life. The carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen come from air and water, but everything else comes from the soil. Most notably nitrogen, which is absorbed as a soil mineral, along with all these other elements that are absorbed as soil minerals by plants. So your plant is absorbing nitrogen from the soil, right? Now, nitrogen's in the atmosphere, but it's tightly bound to itself with this crazy triple bond, and plants can't use it, animals can't use it. The nitrogen has to be fixed by bacteria and be in a mineral form in the soil before plants can absorb it. So your plant is really getting everything from the soil except for carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, which come from air and water. Really, in a way, soil is at the base of all human nutrition, and yeah, it's kind of a big deal. So here's your plant. It's absorbing nitrogen to make protein and minerals from the soil, and it's getting carbon energy from solar energy plus carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen from air and water. Every single bit of dietary energy that you get is stored as carbon-carbon and carbon-hydrogen bonds in carbohydrates and hydrocarbons, which are basically fats. So what plants do is they take sunlight, air, and water, they take the energy from the sun and create these high-energy carbon-carbon bonds, and that's all of your carbohydrates and all of your fats. Anything that you can oxidize for energy comes from either carbohydrates or hydrocarbons that were put there by plants from solar energy. In fact, everything on Earth that is capable of burning or being oxidized was created by a plant and involves the carbon-carbon bonds of hydrogen of carbohydrates or hydrocarbons. So your plant is sucking nitrogen out of the soil and building amino acids. Amino acids, of course, have nitrogen as a central part of the molecule. You can't have protein without nitrogen. They're getting energy from air and water from to make carbohydrates and fats. So here's your plant. Your plant is sucking nitrogen and minerals out of the topsoil, the nitrogen and mineral nutrient pool. It's incorporating the nitrogen and minerals into its body. It's storing carbon energy as the carbon-carbon bonds in hydrocarbons or fats or carbohydrates, and it's passing all of this up to herbivores, and then herbivores pass all of this up to carnivores. Anytime anything dies, it goes back into the decomposition where bacteria and fungi turn it back into the nitrogen and mineral nutrient pool. So you've got these two cycles going on here. You've got the carbon cycle, you've got the nitrogen cycle. This is just how it works, right? This is the whole system. Now, you can kind of think about your plant as having a protein to energy ratio, which is basically how much nitrogen is in the plant versus how much carbon is in the plant. Similarly, your body can be thought of having a protein to energy ratio or a nitrogen to carbon ratio. And in fact, your body does have a carbon to nitrogen ratio. Now, what plants are doing is sucking up nitrogen and minerals from the soil. And they concentrate nitrogen and minerals, and that's why you'd rather eat a plant than just dirt. The problem, right, thank you. The problem with plants is that they're limited as to how far their roots can reach, right? A plant can only access so much nitrogen and so many minerals. Animals are not limited by this. Animals can walk around and eat a whole bunch of plants and they will actually bioaccumulate or biomagnify nitrogen and minerals. That is why animal foods are always higher nutrient density than plant foods automatically. This is basic science. It's bioaccumulation or biomagnification, the same way that mercury accumulates in ocean fish as you go up the food chain. As you go up the trophic levels, you just get higher levels of micronutrients, nitrogen and minerals. This is just a scientific fact. If you look at the ratio of protein to fat and carbohydrate in the body, or the protein to energy ratio of different living organisms, plants are the lowest, then herbivores, then predators. So your carnivores always automatically have the highest protein to energy ratio, right? That's why carnivores are always thin. Carnivores and predators always have the highest lean mass, the lowest fat mass. It's like Sean Baker, right? Okay. So now humans are unquestionably apex predators, right? That's how we got to where we are. We're apex predators. Well, it's debatable now because we all walk around eating a bunch of soy, but clearly before agriculture, humans were apex predators. And ideally, your body should have more protein than energy. If you look at the protein to energy ratio of your body, if energy is higher than protein, you basically have a problem, right? Now, if we look at the human history, back in the Paleolithic, before agriculture, humans had a very high protein diet. We went out and killed animals, we ate the whole thing. You did not have agriculture. We did not have all these food, plant energies that we could dump into the food supply. So we were actually quite energy constrained. You got plenty of protein, but you're always looking for more energy. Humans did not have all the energy they wanted. So we were always looking for new ways to get energy. We invented technology like basically stone tools, so we could eat bone marrow and brain and organ meat and all these things that added energy to our diet. We were always looking for, digging up tubers or trying to find honey, anything to help give us more energy because we were energy constrained. Now, then we invented agriculture. So humans have just constantly been using technology to feed ourselves. And we invented agriculture, and we started figuring out how to grow starch, and we dumped a bunch of starch energy into the food supply and diluted the amount of protein we were eating. And then we took it one step too far, right? Industrial revolution, bulk refining and transport of sugar, flour, and oil, and we just diluted the hell out of our protein. So now the protein to energy ratio of our diet is horribly low, and the protein to energy ratio of our bodies is similarly low. Here's the problem with agriculture. We preferentially eat the part of food that's the highest in energy, right? We only eat the nuts and the seeds and the tubers and the fruit from plants. We're eating the high energy parts of plants, and then we cultivate these to get the very freaking highest carbon yield out of it that we possibly can. Like corn is just this abomination now. This is the highest energy food in the world. You just squeeze it and you get corn syrup and corn oil out of this stuff. So we just massively magnified the carbon energy. We don't get more protein or minerals out of this. We mostly just get carbon. So the reality is that plants store energy. And we like to eat the parts of the plants with energy, fruit, tubers, nuts, and seeds. Then we cultivate these plants to get the absolute maximum energy out of it. Then we refine and process it to get even more energy. And by the time we're done, the energy to protein dilution is absolutely ridiculous, right? It's just a joke. So back in the Paleolithic, we had this crazy high protein energy ratio. You got lots of animals, lots of protein, but you're always looking for more energy, right? You're looking for energy. Then agricultural revolution, we diluted protein out with starch. There were some health consequences to that. Now in the industrial revolution, we figured out the bulk refining and transport of sugar, flour, and oil. We dumped all of these empty calories, all this carbon into the food supply, and now the protein energy ratio of our bodies mirrors our diet exactly. All right, we're going to talk about the three macronutrients, protein, carbs, and fat. We are not going to talk about alcohol, which is just highly toxic. We are going to spend a lot of time today talking about carbs because this is a low-carb event, right? Okay, when you map out all your foods on the three macronutrient axes, what you immediately see is the higher you go in protein, the higher you get mineral and micronutrient density. Micronutrient density in minerals tracks with protein extremely well. The reverse is also true. The higher you go in the carb plus fat direction, the lower your micronutrient density. And in fact, the foods that are high in carbon and fats are mostly frankenfoods that don't even exist in nature. We know from both human and animal feeding studies that the more carbs plus fat you feed any omnivore mammal, the fatter it's going to get. And the more protein you feed any omnivore mammal, the thinner it's going to get. This is also just how it works. Now, when you eat food, it's broken down. Carbohydrates are broken down into monosaccharides, your glucose, your fructose. Fats are eaten in the form of triglycerides. They're broken down into monoglycerides and free fatty acids. Protein is all broken down into amino acids even before it's absorbed, right? So we break these down and then we absorb them. So you know that all of your carb foods, your bread and your potatoes and your pasta are just big strings of glucose, right? Well, what happens after it's broken down and absorbed? Well, for that, I'm going to refer you to the work of Dr. Jean-Pierre Flat. Professor Flat is a Swiss biochemist. He sadly passed away last year at the age of 85, but Gary Taubes was mentioning yesterday that he interviewed Dr. Flat. He's world famous and a very much awarded researcher into human energy metabolism and human obesity. And Professor Flat taught at Harvard and MIT for many years, and he's a super famous guy. But he figured all this out before I was even born. And Flat is famous for his hydraulic two-compartment model of human energy metabolism because he realized that glucose is water-soluble and is stored in this very tiny glycogen compartment in the liver and the muscles. Fat, on the other hand, is not water-soluble and is stored in an entirely different compartment in your fat cells. And the two of them never really interact because they both drive your metabolism. Glucose and glycogen has to completely control the fuel that's being oxidized at all times because its storage is 1% of the size of fat cells. So I've just made like a prettier, more colorful version of Professor Flat's two-compartment model of metabolism. You've got carbohydrates being stored as glycogen in the liver and muscles. You've got fat being stored in the adipocytes. Fat storage is 100 times larger. Because glycogen is so small, it has leverage and it dictates what fuel is being oxidized at all times. So the way it works, all of your carbohydrates are broken down into monosaccharides, and then they are stored as glycogen in your liver and muscles. All of your fat is broken down into monoglycerides and free fatty acids, reassembled as triglycerides in your fats and your adipocytes. Water-soluble, fat-soluble, two totally separate compartments. Now, glycogen is just human starch. It's basically just chains of glucose. And it's very similar to the starch in like a potato. Now this photo here, the point of this photo is that these are equivalent amounts of energy. The olive oil on the left is an order of magnitude smaller than the potatoes on the right, smaller and lighter, but you've got an equivalent amount of energy there. And actually the fat in the lipid droplet in your adipocytes is almost identical to olive oil. And the glycogen stored in your liver and muscles is almost identical to the starch in these potatoes. Now, we don't like to carry around a lot of glycogen because it's so much larger and heavier. So why do you have glycogen at all? Well, the reason we have glycogen is because it's fast as hell. You can convert glycogen into energy, into ATP, 6 times faster than you can fat. So it's excellent survival mechanism. We absolutely have to have this stuff. But fully hydrated glycogen is very heavy. It's 6 times larger and heavier. In fact, it's called a carbohydrate because it's fully hydrated. And this stuff weighs a lot. Okay, so you've got this unique situation where glycogen is 6 times faster at being converted into energy than fat, but it's 6 times larger and heavier. So your body is doing this trade-off thing. And what ends up happening is that glucose is the fuel of choice for emergency use. If you look at a heart rate fuel profile, at low intensities, you're burning mostly fat. At high intensities, you're burning mostly glucose from glycogen. Now, you can change these curves somewhat if you're fat adapted, but no matter how fat adapted you are, at your very, very highest intensity, you're always burning 100% pure glucose from glycogen. If any of us is sprinting for our lives, we are burning 100% glucose from glycogen. Now, given that glycogen is so much heavier but so much faster, how does your body decide what percent of which one to have on board? Well, evolutionary pressure has carefully molded exactly the right ratios of these to have on hand to keep the largest number of Homo sapiens alive for the longest. And what ends up happening is fat storage is about 100 times larger than carbohydrate storage as glycogen. You need some glycogen for emergency use, but you don't want a lot because it's so heavy to carry around. Okay, you can only hold 4 grams of glucose in your bloodstream. That is not very much. You can hold 300 grams of glucose in your muscles on average as glycogen, but you never use this unless you're doing high intensity exercise. If you are just walking for exercise, you'll never use this. If you're just sitting around sedentary, you'll never use it. It stays there for emergency use. It's only for use in emergencies. This is a safety system. Your body will not use this. It will not turn over. It will literally just sit there. Your liver is a little different. Your liver sucks all the glucose out of your diet, buffers it, and then slowly releases it over the next 12 hours or so. And the liver can easily cycle through about 100 grams of glucose, right? So every day you can pretty reasonably cycle through about 100 grams of glucose. Now 100 grams of glucose is equivalent to about 4 medium-sized apples. And if I just told everybody, hey, guess what? If you're not doing high-intensity exercise, and the average American is doing 0 minutes of high-intensity exercise a day, you probably should eat more than 100 grams of glucose. And I could just stop my talk right there. And if everyone did that, the world would be a different place. This would be like really helpful. But let's keep going. Okay, so fat is 100 times larger than glycogen. So glycogen completely controls the metabolic fuel that's oxidized at all times throughout your entire body. This is called the Randle cycle. This is the competition between glucose and fat, right? They're reciprocally oxidized. Randle cycle. We've known about this for almost 100 years. You dump in glucose, you have to oxidize more glucose. You remove glucose, you automatically have to oxidize more fat. Glucose completely controls what you're oxidizing. Here's fat oxidation on a low-carb diet versus a high-carb diet. Eat more carbs, you have to oxidize more carbs. Eat less carbs, you have to oxidize more fat. Here's fat oxidation on overfeeding on carbs, you have to burn carbs. Here's underfeeding on carbs, you have to burn fat. It's totally reciprocal. Here's an overfeeding study on carbohydrate. At 50% extra carbs, you have 6 times the carb oxidation, and you suppress fat oxidation by over 90%. As you eat less carbs, you see just this perfectly linear, perfectly reciprocal seesaw of burning less glucose and more fat. They're absolutely inverse and reciprocal. That's just how the system works. Now here's an article from the 1950s, 1954. Carbohydrates are fat sparing. Yes, we have known since before you were born that carbohydrates spare fat oxidation. That's their entire role. That is literally exactly what they did. Knowing that carbohydrates spares fat oxidation, wouldn't you think that a low-carb diet would be a really good starting point for anyone who's overweight or trying to lose weight? Well, I certainly think so. I don't understand why it's not a first-line recommendation. That's why I'm here. That's probably why a lot of you guys are here. Okay, so back to the 2-compartment model, right? Here is someone eating a low-carb and a low-fat diet. This would be maybe a bodybuilder or a fitness model. They're eating mostly protein and fiber. They're low-carb and low-fat. They're going to have very low body fat. They're going to have very low insulin levels. They're going to be hungry as hell, right? You're super hungry. But your insulin sensitivity is ridiculous. These bodybuilders have incredibly low insulin levels, and they have tons of headroom for any glucose or any fat that comes along. So it's protein and fiber. You're really hungry. You're super lean. You're super low insulin. I try to eat this way myself. I'm very low carb. I'm eating a lot of protein. I'm trying to keep fat low as well, which is painful and horrible. Yeah, you're super hungry. Yeah, so now this is somebody on a high carb, low fat diet. This is your average low fat vegan, right? So they're eating tons of carbs. Glycogen's always high. They're displacing the hell out of fat oxidation, but they're not eating a lot of fat. Maybe they're barely eating any fat at all. So guess what? Fat is not accumulating. This low-fat, high-carb vegan is going to be very thin. They're going to be very insulin sensitive. They're going to be totally fine. Now, there are some downsides to this diet. First of all, you have tons of glycemic excursions. Blood sugar is constantly going up and down. When blood sugar falls, you get hungry. So their blood sugar is falling over and over, and they get hungry and they have to eat more frequently. So your high-carb, low-fat vegan is going to eat a lot more frequently. They're going to have maybe mood swing issues. They're going to have possibly more tissue glycation from glycemic excursions. Probably not ideal for dental health because we know as a scientific fact that dental disease is linearly associated with the frequency of carbohydrate consumption. So if you're eating carbs all day long, it's probably bad for your teeth, probably bad for your mood, probably bad for glycation, but you will stay thin and insulin sensitive on this diet. Now this is the way everybody in this room is eating, right? Low carb, high fat. You're eating a ton of fat, But that's fine, because you're burning a ton of fat. Glucose is low, carbs are low, glycogen's low, so you're burning fat wide open. You're going to stay lean, you're going to stay insulin sensitive, you're going to be perfectly healthy. There are some benefits to this style of eating. First of all, you're very well fat adapted, so you're really good at just living off of fat. This means that it's easier for you to fast. You can go really long periods of time without eating. Your blood sugar is flat as a pancake. It's much better if you have any form of diabetes because you have glycemic excursions. Mood might be better because blood sugar is so stable, you're less hangry. And then definitely from a dental perspective, this has to be better for you. So there's a lot of real significant, just pure science benefits to eating this way. Now this is the worst, right? This is the standard American diet. This is the way everybody around us is eating. This is the way the whole planet is eating. High carb and high fat. They're eating a ton of carbs. Glycogen's always high. They're displacing the hell out of fat oxidation. But guess what? They're eating a bunch of fat too. And all this fat is just steadily accumulating, right? All the fat you eat just gets stored automatically, immediately your hepatocytes. So this is everybody on earth. This is all my patients. This is everybody who's just eating whatever they want. They're gaining, 3 pounds a year after year, and they end up, 100 pounds overweight. This is the entire planet. This is not good. I'm quoting here from Professor Flatt, and I love this guy. It seems reasonable to consider that an upward shift in the range within which glycogen concentrations are habitually maintained, brought about by changes in the food supply and a further decline in physical activity, could explain the marked increase in the incidence of obesity in the U.S. population in the last decade. In other words, we eat way more carbs and glucose, glycogen's always high, and so we're just accumulating fat. And he's totally right. I think he totally nailed it. Now, eventually, you hit the settling point of obesity. Now, what do I mean by settling point? As you get fatter, the pressure to oxidize fat goes up. Your free fatty acids literally go up. You get fatter and your free fatty acids go up, the pressure to oxidize fat goes up. Eventually, you reach a point where you're finally fat enough to oxidize all the fat you're eating despite your chronically high glycogen. And this is the settling point of obesity. And Professor Flatt talks about this as well. The cause of obesity being inherited or induced by circumstances would thus appear to be an insufficient rate of fatty acid oxidation relative to glucose oxidation when the adipose tissue mass is of a normal size. In other words, you have to get quite a bit fatter for the pressure for fat oxidation to equal your fat intake and your chronically high glycogen. Okay, now Professor Flatt has a bunch of articles and a bunch of research and a bunch of publications, and I love this guy, and I'm just quoting from him again. This is good stuff. It appears that failure of appropriately reducing the range within glycogen levels are maintained when the diet's fat content rises will require an expansion of the adipose tissue mass to raise free fatty acid levels and fat oxidation to a rate commensurate with the proportion of fat in the diet. In other words, you ate a whole bunch more glucose, but you didn't eat less fat, and so you're going to have to get really fat for your fat oxidation to equal your fat intake. Okay, another point I want to make is that when obese people eat carbs, the shutoff of fat oxidation they get is really much higher than lean people. Here's a graph of fat oxidation before eating carbs and after eating carbs. Green bars are lean people, red bars are obese people, and look at basically this complete suppression of fat oxidation obese people get after eating carbohydrates. This is probably why they're obese right here. Okay, now let's talk about your liver. The liver is the most important most important organ in human bioenergetic metabolism. The liver is central to everything. And what the liver does is it makes all your glucose. The liver is totally responsible for glucose. It manufactures all your glucose. It absorbs all the glucose out of your diet. It's central to everything your body does metabolically. And basically, the liver is sucking glucose out of your diet and then making glucose when you're not eating it. And this slide is just needlessly complicated. But the point here is that, hepatic glycogen is the center of all bioenergetic regulation. Literally everything in your body revolves around glucose and hepatic glycogen. I drew this crazy little chart here where this square in the center is your liver and the red areas are glucose and glycogen, and the pink square is your bloodstream. And you've got food energy coming in from the GI tract, and energy going back and forth to the adipocytes, and energy going to the muscles, and then down to the rest of the tissues of the body. And if you graph out every fuel and everything that goes everywhere, and I do expect everyone to memorize this by the end of this time. Basically, the only point here is that glucose And glycogen in your liver is completely the epicenter of everything that your body is doing metabolically. It's just a huge, big deal. The other point I want to make is that the liver does this all by itself, automatically, even without insulin or glucagon. It's just mechanically sucking glucose out of your diet and then releasing glucose and making glucose. It auto-regulates all your glucose. It's almost like a mechanical system. I also want to point out that the Randall cycle, where adding glucose leads to higher glucose oxidation, basically happens all by itself, even without insulin or glucagon. This is happening automatically just from the presence of glucose. Now, here's what your liver does. It's really interesting. Your liver sucks all the glucose out of your diet and stores it as glycogen and then releases it over the next 12 hours or so. And if you look at the storage and release curves of liver glycogen, there's basically a stress-strain curve identical to what you'd see from any mechanical thing like a balloon or a lung or a sponge or anything that sucks something up and then releases it. In fact, you could calculate, if you're just a super huge dork like me, you could calculate a dynamic kinetic modulus of elasticity of your liver where the stress, strain, loading, unloading curves of glycogen is basically just like a balloon. So your liver is literally just inflating the glucose from your diet and then deflating the glucose over the next 12 hours or so. It's buffering out the glucose, probably to keep you alive. Now, so what's happening is that liver glycogen is constantly falling down towards zero, and it will stay at zero until you eat carbs again. It's not really zero, but it's as low as it ever gets, so it's effectively zero. So the liver swells up with glycogen after a meal, slowly releases it like a balloon over the next 12 hours, and then just stays at zero indefinitely until you eat carbs again. So liver glycogen is constantly falling down towards zero. As it falls, blood sugar falls, and insulin falls. This is the decline of the fed state, and you see a slow rise of the fasted state, right? Glucagon goes up, free fatty acids and ketones go up. This is probably a better picture, yeah. So we've got liver glycogen just slowly drifting down towards zero. You've got glucose and insulin also going down. Fed state is going down. Fasted state is rising. Glucagon, free fatty acids, and ketones. This is the smooth, slow transition from the fed state to the fasted state. This is how your body goes from fed to fasted. This is absolutely central to ketone generation. Everything your body does metabolically is really being totally driven by hepatic glycogen. Now, here's a graph of like a 16-hour fast, maybe the lean gain 16-8 intermittent fast. This pink-purple square is fasting for 16 hours. Even if you're on a high-carb diet after 16 hours of fasting, your hepatic glycogen is going to be pretty close to zero, and you're pretty well triggering the fasted state with the rise of glucagon and free fatty acids and ketones. And this is why intermittent fasting is a pretty powerful protocol, even if somebody's on a high-carb diet. Okay, this is what I was talking about before. Liver glycogen falls down to zero. It's not quite zero, but it's effectively zero, and then goes back up only when you eat carbs. So, here's 12 hours fasting, here's 18 hours fasting, stays down to zero until you eat carbs again. Here's what you might not know, and this is so important. Your liver is making all the glucose you ever need, whether you eat carbs or not. Behind the scenes, your liver is making glucose. This is a graph of endogenous glucose production. This is glucose released by the liver. The black bars are gluconeogenesis. This is your liver making glucose from scratch, which it's doing all the time, no matter what. The dietary glucose just gets stacked on top of that as glycogen, artificially bumping up your blood sugar and your liver glucose release for the next 12 hours or so until it's gone. So I tried to summarize that with this slide here. Dietary carbohydrates are absorbed by the liver, followed by a transient increase in hepatic glucose output with subsequent increase of insulin and decrease of whole body fat oxidation. Meanwhile, in this little blue square, your liver was making all the glucose you needed anyway behind the scenes. This dietary glucose is just raising your blood sugar transiently while hepatic glucose is drifting back down to zero. Here's another study that illustrated this. Basically, glycogen's gone after about 8 hours. It just artificially raises your blood sugar, but your liver's making all the glucose you needed underneath that. Here's another look at it. Glycogen's gone after 12 hours, and then your body's just running straight off of gluconeogenesis and ketogenesis. Here's one more look at it. Glycogen is just cranking up your glucose output from the liver for a day at the most, just radically raising your glucose output. But underneath it all, your body's just making all this glucose out of mostly amino acids, but also glycerol and lactate. And that's just what your body does automatically. The problem here is that everyone's eating a bunch of carbs all freaking day long. This is the Sachin Panda study, where they gave a bunch of people a smartphone app, and they tracked how often they ate and what they ate. And the average person had a 15-hour eating window. It was almost 16 hours. So your average person is doing the opposite of the lean gain 16-8, right? They're eating 16 hours, and they're fasting 8 hours. That's why I really like flipping that around. And then they're eating 8 times per day on average. So your average person is eating 8 times a day in a 15 or 16-hour window. And this is what they're eating. This is the standard American diet. 100 grams of protein, 100 grams of fat, 300 grams of carbohydrates. This is the standard American diet. Actually, the protein is really like 91 grams. I just rounded up to make a prettier picture. So. Okay, so one of the problems here is you're eating carbs 8 times a day every 2 hours. What happens when you eat carbs and your blood sugar goes up and then your blood sugar falls a couple hours later? Well, thanks to Dr. Ludwig, we know that as your glucose falls, you get hungry. So you're eating carbs 8 times a day, and every 2 hours, your blood sugar is falling, your glycogen's falling, your hepatic glycogen's falling, your blood sugar's falling, and you're getting hungry, and you're just eating carbs again. And it's just this ridiculous cycle. Here's another study, high carb breakfast, you get hungry 2 hours later. We all know that. You just eat like toast and juice for breakfast, and you're starving in 2 hours. Okay, I wanted to talk about glycogen in your muscles for a second here. So I mentioned before that if you're doing light exercise, you're never using any muscle glycogen at all. If you are just walking, you are never, ever going to use any muscle glycogen. You have to do moderate or heavy exercise to burn any muscle glycogen. The heavier your exercise, the faster you deplete glycogen. Here's a study where people did 80% of their VO2 max, it's kind of their maximum output. It took about 80 minutes to deplete all the glycogen in their muscles. We know that humans, no matter how fat adapted you are, you can only do high intensity exercise for about 2 hours and then you completely bonk. So if you're running a marathon, you've got about 2 hours before you completely deplete liver and muscle glycogen and your blood sugar starts to drop. And that's why you see these elite marathoners crawling over the finish line at the 2 hour mark. They just bonk so hard they have no more glucose anywhere in their body. Even your fat-adapted athletes who are doing high-intensity exercise for more than 2 hours are carefully eating glucose the entire event, maybe 60 grams an hour or so. So an intermittent exhaustion and full glycogen in the human organism is a simple, universal health-promoting mechanism. Basically, when you deplete all the glycogen in your body, it's magical for your metabolism. Your fat oxidation goes through the roof. Your insulin sensitivity goes through the roof. You can deplete liver glycogen by just not eating carbs for 16 hours. But in order to deplete muscle glycogen, you have to do high-intensity exercise for some amount of time. Now, how long? You can always trade intensity for duration. This is glycogen depletion protocols. And at lower levels of intensity, it might take 4 hours to deplete all your muscle glycogen, which you could do the same depletion in 9 minutes on a really, really high intensity protocol. Here's some cyclists who did 1 minute blasts at 140% VO2 max. This is super maximal. Basically, you pedal all out for a minute, rest for a minute, pedal again for a minute. It takes 10 minutes to get rid of 71% of all the glycogen in the working muscles. So you can always trade intensity for duration when it comes to exercise. That's why I like high intensity exercise, both cardio and resistance. What happens when you suck this much glycogen out of your body? Your metabolism is insanely improved. Your fat oxidation goes through the roof. Your insulin sensitivity goes through the roof. This is incredibly, incredibly powerful. Here's a graph of fat oxidation before and after 1 hour of high intensity exercise. The black bars are fat oxidation. The fat oxidation is dramatically increased, and this effect lasts for about 24 hours while your muscles are slowly building up glycogen again. Here's a study where they had people basically do an hour of high-intensity exercise, and their whole metabolism improved, their fat oxidation goes way up. This is a study in obese people. They had them do 1 hour of high-intensity exercise, and their fat oxidation went up so high that their whole metabolism was identical to a lean person. The fat oxidation was extremely high. Even when they ate carbohydrates, the fat oxidation was high. But my favorite is both carb restriction and high-intensity exercise. This is probably the holy grail of insulin sensitivity and fat oxidation, doing both of these, right? This is where I try to live. Now, everybody asks me, well, I just did a big workout, now I've got to replenish my glycogen, right? That's total crap. Here's the famous faster study with Drs. Volek and Finney, right? So Volek and Finney looked at low carb and high carb athletes. They looked at glycogen before exercise, after exercise, and 2 hours later. And everybody replenishes their muscle glycogen automatically. So it's a very high priority task for your body. It will replenish your muscle glycogen, no matter if you eat carbs or not. Here's another study looking at carb loading versus no carb loading after a glycogen exhaustion protocol, and there's no differences at all. I know that it does take about 24 hours to completely get back to where you were, but eating carbs doesn't help, so you don't have to eat carbohydrates to replenish glycogen. That's totally mythical. Now, you got to ask yourself, what are carbs for? So we already know that your liver makes all the glucose you ever need, so you don't have to eat carbs for that. We already know that your body will replenish all your muscle glycogen, even with high-intensity exercise, without ever eating any carbohydrates at all. So you got to ask yourself, what are carbohydrates for? And they really are there to preserve body fat. Now that sounds like dumb or like a joke, but from an evolutionary perspective, this was a huge big deal, right? This kept us alive in the wintertime. You're storing fat intentionally to try to live through the winter. And if any carbs come along, you definitely want to preserve any stored body fat you've got, right? Because you're trying to keep that fat for like February when there's nothing out there to eat. So this is a huge big deal. And the whole body's systems with the carbs and the fat is designed to keep us alive when we don't have enough food, right? Now let's just talk for a second on eating fat. Eating fat is totally different. When you eat fat, it's immediately stored in your adipocytes. Well, some of it your body will burn, but the rest of it is passively stored, and nothing happens. Fat oxidation does not go up. Carb oxidation does not go down. Nothing changes at all. It's literally just passively stored in your adipocytes. That's fine if your fat oxidation is pretty high. But if you're on a high-carb standard American diet, every bit of fat you eat is just going to accumulate, and you're going to get fatter and fatter. Eventually, as your adipocytes get enlarged, you become more and more insulin resistant because you don't have any place to put fat. Here's my crazy diagram again, and you see that once the adipocytes are full, glucose and triglycerides have no place to go. So they just stack up in the bloodstream, and then the pancreas, which is basically just a fancy fuel pressure sensor gauge, sees all this energy in the bloodstream and pumps out more insulin in a futile attempt to have the glucose and triglycerides go someplace, but they don't have any place to go. Here's a graph of adipose tissue triglyceride extraction in lean versus abdominally obese men. Lean men just suck all the triglycerides out of their bloodstream into their fat cells. But once your fat cells are full, the triglycerides have no place to go. And then pretty soon the glucose has no place to go. And that's type 2 diabetes. When you've completely filled up your fat cells and all of your fat cells are fusing glucose and triglycerides, and the glucose spills over in your urine, that is when you're diabetic. This is what diabetes is. Okay, I'm just going to summarize here for a minute. Fat and glucose are oxidized reciprocally in your cells, right? Perfectly reciprocal. The intracellular availability of glucose, not fat, controls the substrate that's oxidized for energy. This worked perfectly back when we only got carbs seasonally. It was absolutely brilliant. You know, summertime, you get more energy. There's fatter animals, there's plant carbohydrates. You get more energy in both forms. You're going to try to save all this for the wintertime. So this system really kept us alive. But now that we've got carbs all year round, we're basically screwed. We broke the system. Okay, so you want to get better at oxidizing fat, right? You want to be better at oxidizing fat. And we're going to use the SAID principle, specific adaptation to impose demand. How do you get better at burning fat? You only have to do one thing to get better at burning fat. Eat less carbs. That's it. You'll automatically get better at burning fat. But if you want to increase fat oxidation even more, there are really two things you can do: exercise and carbohydrate reduction. This is very simple math. Fat oxidation is energy expenditure minus carbohydrate intake. So there are two things you can do to increase fat oxidation: exercise and avoid carbohydrates. Now, fat loss is a slightly different equation. That's fat oxidation minus fat intake. So if you want to lose even more fat, you might want to add eating less fat to this equation. You know what I'm saying? And so on this slide, you've got the three things you can do to be less fat: exercise, carbohydrate restriction, fat restriction. So my advice to my patients who see me, this is a standard American diet. I'm like, hey, why don't you rebalance this? Let's get rid of some of the carbs. Let's get some more protein in there. And finally, I just want to say you are what you eat. If you eat mostly energy, you're going to be mostly energy. This is simple carbon to nitrogen math. If you eat mostly protein, you're going to be mostly protein. And again, the carbon to nitrogen ratio of your body is going to reflect that of your diet pretty well. Yeah, and that's my talk.